From 1995 to 1999, Sony Computer Entertainment held 6 programs for aspiring game creators called Game Yaroze. It was a Japan-exclusive event where independent game developers could submit their game plans or projects or ideas to Sony, and after a careful screening, Sony would decide whether or not they wanted to support them. And according to an archived article from Sony's old website dedicated to the program, they saw over 1,200 applicants, but only approximately 30 games were released. What you're seeing right now is some gameplay footage of those very few games that were released thanks to the Game Yaroze program. And as you might imagine, most of those titles ended up being pretty obscure. I think the most popular games to come from it are Devil Dice, which is one of the very few Game Yaroze titles to see a release outside of Japan, and Dokodemo Isho, the series featuring that cat that I can't ever remember the name of. For the subject of today's video though, we're gonna focus on Aconcagua, a Japan-exclusive point-and-click adventure game from 2000 that was co-developed by Sony's Japan studio and whack whack. But to be more specific, Aconcagua comes from the mind of Yasutaka Masuda, one of the qualifiers of Game Yaroze 97. Believe it or not, I discovered it through Dr. Slump of all things. Back in 1999, the series had a PlayStation 1 game released exclusively for Japan, and this was another game I was familiar with, but I never had the chance to play in full. That is until 2022, when I was probably just goofing around on the internet or something, and it randomly struck me, oh yeah, a Dr. Slump game existed at one point or another. I wonder what that looks like now. So I looked the game up and found out that a hacker named Hilltop released a full English translation of this game just the year prior. So I played that, beat that, loved that, and I looked at Hilltop's profile to see what other games they might have worked on as well. And that's when I saw the subject of today's video, Aconcagua. The English patch for Aconcagua credits 3 people in particular. Hilltop, of course, Mr. Nobody, and Michael M35 Sabin. At the time I discovered Aconcagua, the translation was still a work in progress, so I couldn't play it, but the game did catch my eye from visuals alone. It sort of reminded me of Mazerna Falls being another Japan-exclusive PS1 adventure game set in a snowy setting, but honestly, I think the similarities stop there. It wasn't only the way the game looked that drew me in though, it was also the game's cover art. This majestic shot of a patriotic woman standing on a mountain's ridge while holding her left hand over her heart and a flag in her other. There's just something about this image that captivates me. I love it. There's also a bit of text on the cover. There's the title of the game in both English and Japanese, along with a powerful quote about Aconcagua in Spanish that tells you what's yet to come. And what I mean by that is, this game uses 3 languages. You don't need to understand Japanese to beat this game, because it's voiced entirely in English and Spanish. It would definitely help if you knew Japanese, because all the text is still in that language and you're gonna lose out on a lot of context. But I'm certain that if you're paying attention to what's going on, you can beat this game without knowing a lick of Japanese. But yeah, this game has been on my backlog for a while now, and I figure it's time to finally give it a chance. So let's start with the story as always. The story mostly takes place on Aconcagua, a real mountain located in the Argentine province Mendoza, but in this game it's located in the fictional South American country Maruza. Maruza's not doing so well either. It's a corrupt country that's led by military dictatorship, but the people of Maruza have fought back against the regime by starting a rebel democratic movement led by a woman named Pachamama. Now, when we jump into the story, things have almost reached a boiling point in the country of Maruza. It's the day before their Independence Day, and Pachamama finds herself on a flight back to her country, and the flight's other passengers includes Pachamama's bodyguard, a Japanese journalist named Kato, his cameraman Nakayama, and a few others we'll get to in just a second. So Kato and Nakayama try to interview Pachamama on the flight, but she tells them she's tired and now is not a good time. So Kato and Nakayama return to their seats while the bodyguard gets a blanket for Pachamama. But then, A bomb hidden in the plane explodes. It crashes on Aconcagua, and we see Kato waking from the crash on one of the mountain's cliffs. After climbing his way up the cliff, he finds a few other survivors of the plane crash. Pachamama, who Kato helps get back on her feet, and Nagayama, who unfortunately passes away in Kato's arms. Together though, Kato and Pachamama find a few other survivors. One being Steve, an engineer from the States, and the other survivor being Julia, another journalist who also comes from the States. They also find Pachamama's bodyguard, who's been bleeding out in front of the plane's cockpit. And after they patch him up, they head inside the cockpit where they see one of the plane's pilots is still alive. But not for long. He runs out of the cockpit after hearing a helicopter thinking it's a rescue party coming to save them, except it's a military helicopter and they want to kill you all. Well, not all of you. After firing at everyone but Pachamama, a soldier hops out to speak with her and reveals his orders are to kill everyone except for her. Thankfully, Pachamama's bodyguard shoots the soldier, and with the power of a life raft and teamwork, everyone manages to take down that helicopter. But unfortunately, Pachamama's bodyguard passes away from his injuries shortly after. So, after a quick burial, you continue making your way down the mountain where you all meet Lopez, an importer-exporter from America and the final survivor. And that's where I'm gonna leave the story at for now. The only other thing you need to know is that the Marusan military is still looking for all the survivors. So let's mention the first thing you notice as soon as you actually start playing the game. It's a point and click, and a pretty simple one at that. You can swap characters with the shoulder buttons, you can point the cursor at any point on the map without an X symbol to move there, and you can point the cursor at points of interest to have your character interact with them. Sometimes you can use items on them, and sometimes you can have characters swap items by letting them talk to each other. But that's about all you can do though. Like I said, it's a pretty simple game. There aren't any specific actions you can choose to do like other point and click games of the time would allow you to do, but that's fine because everything in this game works as it should. Mostly. There are some minor quirks in the gameplay that I had to get used to. Like if I wanted to move a character to a specific spot, but it was blocked by, let's say, a cliff, I had to set them up around the obstacle instead of just clicking on the spot I wanted them to go to, because if I did that, then they'd get caught on a corner or something. It wasn't always a problem, but it was a common one. More often than not, they were smart enough to just walk around barriers themselves. And I guess that's my only real complaint against the gameplay. Well, that and it's a point and click game that doesn't support the PlayStation mouse. It's not necessary, but it would have been nice. So one of my biggest worries when starting this game, and pretty much any point and click game, is that there would be a lot of inevitable fail states or dead man walking situations where you could forget to grab an item in an early part of the game and be screwed over later in the story when you need it most. But I'm glad to say that's not really an issue with this game. You'll find everything you need for each level. The levels in this game are really short too. Each one confines you to a very small part of the mountain where you'll have to solve a puzzle to figure out how to advance. I will say though, there was one situation I ran into in a later part of the game where I had to use a Marusan army outfit to slip past some guards, and I had the choice to give it to either Julia or Pachamama, but I didn't know that at first. I thought I had to give it to Julia because she has a combat knife she can kill soldiers with in case things got hairy, but when I tried to walk past some of those soldiers, they killed Julia almost immediately because she didn't understand their language. So I loaded up the save I made just before starting the level, got the outfit, gave it to Julia again thinking maybe I could just walk further out of their range, but then I remembered Pachamama speaks Spanish. I could just give the outfit to her. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out how to take the outfit off after Julia put it on, so I had to die and load my save up all over again to give Pachamama the outfit. But that's the only situation I can think of in the entire game where you could screw yourself over like that. I should have known to give Pachamama the outfit after the first death. She's not the only character with her own ability though. Everyone has their own gimmick that makes them stand out. Kato happens to be really good at climbing, and Steve, being an engineer, is really good at using his tools on anything mechanical. Julia, having covered wars in the past, always carries a knife on her person for self-defense, which makes her good at killing, and she kills a lot in this game. Like, seriously, a lot. Kato gets his fair share of kills too, but Julia, what's going on, girl? Pachamama speaks Spanish, as I've already mentioned, and Lopez is just really strong. Seriously though, this game gets good mileage out of all these abilities. I like how none of the survivors ever feel like dead weight. I don't have a lot of negative things to say about any of them. They all play off each other well, and I think they react believably for the situation they've been put into. Kato, being a farmer mountaineer, shows comfort with being stranded on a mountain, and usually acts as the voice of reason among the group. He's usually the one to quell any infighting. And Julia, let's say having experience with this sort of thing, also keeps a level head in this situation, but she does keep to herself a lot. Steve, just being some guy who is caught up in all of this, reacts with distress and a lot of swearing. He even lashes out at the other survivors, believing they had something to do with the plane exploding. Pachamama shows signs of despair herself, but she doesn't accuse anyone of sabotage like Steve does. She places most of the blame on herself and feels like a failure as a leader. The one character I thought was lacking was Lopez. His entire character just seems to be that he's strong and from America, but again, he plays with the rest of the cast well. He usually sides with Steve, believing one of them is a traitor. I read in an interview from the official Aconcagua strategy guide that's been translated by Shmuplations, I'm gonna link to it below by the way, but don't click it yet because it has spoilers, that there were originally 8 playable characters planned for this game, and the few who were cut for being ill-defined had parts of their stories absorbed by the final cast that we have now. For example, Kato didn't used to be good at climbing mountains until they wrote out the German mountain climber Rohiniston, who didn't work so well in the story. Other characters were rewritten entirely as well, like Lopez, who used to be Pachamama's bodyguard instead of just, well, some guy. They probably made the right call though, because I think a more concise cast works perfectly for that low-budget cinematic experience they were aiming for. Masuda also said in the interview, quote, "I would be happy if people could enjoy the game in the spirit of a B-movie. I like the feeling of B-movies, where there's no budget so they have to squeeze out every last drop of ingenuity. And boy did they succeed. Almost everything in Aconcagua, from the political drama narrative to the action set pieces, the almost John Williams-esque soundtrack, and the ragtag cast of characters all combine to give you the feeling that you're watching a cheesy 80s movie or something, where they knew what they were making wasn't gonna be winning any awards or anything, but they still made an effort here to be entertaining. There's more I want to talk about on that B-movie point too, but in order to do that, we're gonna have to go over Aconcagua's entire story, and my feelings on this game's story strongly relates to my feelings on this game as a whole, so spoiler warning. But before I even get to my closing thoughts or anything, I'm gonna say that if anything about this game interests you, go play it. I think it's worth experiencing on your own. It's a really short game that took me about 6 hours to beat in my first playthrough, and I shaved that down to about 4 on my second. I'll have a link to the translation below. There's even one in Spanish if that's more your style. But alright, it's Spoiler City from now on. So let's pick up where we left off. The gang just met Lopez, and now they need to get past a soldier guarding a path they have to cross, so Julia kills him. Steve freaks out and questions if Julia is really a journalist, but she tells him what she did was necessary. She kills another couple of soldiers as well, and they learn valuable bits of information by looting their corpses. From one soldier's radio, they learn reinforcements are closing in on their positions, and from another soldier's map, they learn there's a government communication facility somewhere on the mountain they can sneak into and radio for help. This time though, Lopez questions Julia for knowing what a government building looks like on a map, and she just tells him she's a journalist. So they ambush that bunch of soldiers who are closing in on them by causing an avalanche and killing them all. and they continue making their way down the mountain to the government building. And all the while, Lopez and Steve keep harassing Julia, asking her if she's really a journalist. When they make their way inside the building, they find it's pretty empty except for one soldier in the control room. So they tie him up and learn that the bomb on the plane was planted by the Marusan military to assassinate Pachamama. The survivors also use the transmitter in the control room to contact some rebel forces who say they're on their way to save everyone. And while everyone is leaving the building, Lopez stays behind for a little bit to destroy the radio equipment. He rejoins everyone pretty quickly though, and a rebel helicopter arrives at our location pretty fast too. But it's shot down by a missile, and more Marusan soldiers arrive out of nowhere. It's almost like they were told by someone exactly where we're located. There's no time to argue though, cause the soldiers chase our heroes across a bridge that they end up destroying to get away from them. When they finally have a moment to breathe, Pachamama breaks down saying maybe it would have been for the best if she did die in the crash. And Lopez reminds everyone that there's a strong chance there's a traitor among them. But Kato consoles the group and they push on until they come across a rope bridge. Kato crosses first, but it collapses and strands him on one side of the mountain, and while trying to find a way to get over to him, Julia gets stuck inside a cave. Lopez and Steve suggest abandoning her, but Pachamama convinces them not to leave her behind. And everyone, including Kato who's made his way back over the gap, rescues Julia. Steve and Lopez have had it with her though. They question why a journalist would be so experienced using weapons, and how she knows just a little too much about the Marusan government. And she finally reveals the truth that she's an undercover CIA agent. Her mission this entire time was to watch over Pachamama and make sure she got back to Marusa safely, and that's why she was on the flight as well. Apparently, the US isn't a huge fan of how Marusa is run either. Not because they care about Marusa's freedom or anything human like that though, it's because they want some money. Marusa's current military regime placed all their industries under state control, which meant American-owned companies couldn't profit off of them anymore. So the US government sent someone to watch over Pachamama, knowing that she and the people of Marusa could potentially turn their country back into a democracy, and in return, Marusa would give America concessions. Pachamama and Kato get a little mad at Julia, thinking she doesn't really believe in the rebel cause, but she convinces them that she really doesn't want to see this country go into civil war. And things go way better from here on out. Steve and Lopez are no longer hostile towards Julia, and they've made it far enough down the mountain to meet some rebel forces. The gang even made it to a helicopter they can use to get off the mountain. Except Lopez reveals himself as the traitor. He shoots the pilot with a gun he had on him and orders Julia to fly them all to a military base. When we next see the survivors, they're all being locked up in separate cells except for Pachamama, who's being interrogated by Lopez. So Kato breaks out of his cell by going prone over a pile of ketchup and hopes to break Julia and Steve out of their cells. Steve goes to a tiny control room where he can monitor the entire base while Julia and Kato sneak around and try to find Pachamama. Kato eventually finds her on another floor with Lopez, and there's a very mini boss fight where Kato has to lure Lopez on top of this electric floor panel and Julia has to activate it. Lopez passes out after that, and now reunited with Pachamama, our heroes make their way to the roof of the building, except for Steve who's still in the control room. Lopez is here though, and now he has a machine gun. So there's another boss fight against this guy here that's quick and easy when you know what you're doing, but I didn't know what I was doing the first go around. The goal here is to turn off these giant lights by using Julia's knife to cut the wires on this panel, but you have to sneak past him using these cargo containers as cover, because if he sees you, he'll shoot you and take off like a quarter of your health. At first, I thought you just had to wait for him to turn his back to you naturally, because a scene would pop up every so often where he says, "You can't get away from me," or something to that effect. But then I realized he wasn't turning his body at all. He was aiming in the same direction every time.
And then I learned you have to pop out from different corners with different characters to draw his attention away from Julia, who needed to be where the wires were. The reason I didn't get this immediately though is because drawing his attention away from Julia's path was the first thing I did, but I took damage every time I peeked out from a corner, so I thought this must be wrong. But no, that was the right thing to do. I just didn't know that you could run back to safety after getting Lopez's attention if you were fast enough. I thought the camera moving out with you was part of the cinematic where you take damage, but this part became a piece of cake after learning that it wasn't. After Julia turns the lights off, Kato drops a net he found on top of Lopez and attacks him, which causes Lopez to drop his gun. Julia picks it up and aims it at him, but now she can't see without light. Fortunately though, Steve shows up on an adjacent roof and uses his engineering skills on another panel to turn the lights back on. And while Lopez is in the middle of choking out Kato, Julia shoots him to put an end to this mess once and for all. Except this guy activates a bomb with his last dying breath. By the way, I just realized that's 2 games I've talked about in a row where that's happened now. On top of a roof and everything. By using a nearby crane, everyone manages to get over to the roof Steve is on, and they all escape the burning building by hopping back inside the helicopter. Julia flies the helicopter to Maruza, where everyone sees the military and civilians are on the brink of civil war. But they notice Pachamama just in time before firing any shots, and the people rejoice knowing that she's safe. In the game's epilogue, we learn Pachamama was elected the president of Maruza, and credits roll. Thank you Hilltop, Mr. Nobody, and Michael. That was a fun story. But here's the thing about Aconcagua's story. It's pretty shallow. There's a little political commentary about how capitalist nations exploit third world countries, but there isn't really a message that the game is trying to get across. And Lopez, our main villain, remains a pretty uninteresting character. Even after you learn he's the traitor and he has a personal grudge against Pachamama because he believes she knows where the rebels who bombed his entire family are based, which she doesn't. What Aconcagua is short, sweet, and predictable. But I don't care. I don't care that the reveal of Lopez being the traitor isn't as grand as it should have been because they kept putting red flags on his back the entire game. And I don't care that this game has a cliche Hollywood ending where all the heroes arrive just at the break of dawn to put an end to the war either, because that all works perfectly for the kind of game Aconcagua was intended to be. It's a B-movie turned into a PS1 game. The story can be as trite as it wants for all I care. All it needed to do was give us a reason to care about these characters and a reason to want to get off this mountain. And that's exactly what Aconcagua's story does. Not a lot, but enough. And that's really how I feel about this game as a whole. I don't think there's anything exceptionally great about this game, but I don't think there's anything terrible about it either. I just think everything in it is just good enough. The gameplay, it's nothing special, it's just good enough. And the vocal performances, not the best I've ever heard, not the worst either, just good enough. The story, again, just good enough. There's nothing in here that's groundbreaking or doing anything particularly special. But that's not to say this game is completely devoid of any passion or ambition. You know, there are all the elements I mentioned earlier, like the soundtrack and the characters, but there are other little things this game does well too, like the flavor text that not only does a good job at world building, but also gives you a better understanding of everyone's character. And the higher quality models they all swap the characters to for the cutscenes. Like I said, these are little things they didn't have to include, but they did, and I think it all goes to show the effort put into this game. And I think that's what you admire here when it's all said and done. But I guess those are all of my thoughts on Aconcagua.
I'm glad I got to play this game. I know I keep saying it, but you should play through this game if it interests you. You know, come to your own conclusions on it. I didn't think it was very hard at all, so you shouldn't have too much trouble getting through it. There was one puzzle in the game where an object I needed wasn't immediately apparent, and that tripped me up for a bit, but this game is mostly a breeze, you know? It's full of puzzles that'll make you think for a second and then hit you like a ton of bricks. Researching this game was just as fun as playing it too. It sent me down the Yaroze rabbit hole for a few hours, so I'm glad I got to learn about all that. I'm not the biggest PS1 guy, so it was all news to me. At first, I learned what the Game Yaroze program was, and then I got to learn about the Net Yaroze, which was a dev kit PlayStation Sony would ship to consumers with instructions on how to make your own game. Yeah, if you had $750 to buy a Net Yaroze, a computer, and a general knowledge of C, you could make PlayStation games in your own bedroom. And that's just a really cool concept to me. I know anyone can download a game engine on their computer and put out a simple game nowadays, but I think Sony was ahead of the curve by offering a product like this to hobbyists back in the 90s. And once again, I was only able to discover and play this game thanks to the team behind this translation. I'm gonna have all their links below, so check them out. And if you enjoy videos talking about video game translations, I'm sure you'd enjoy my video where I review the Japan exclusive Sega Dreamcast game Rent a Hero #1 as well. And that's probably my favorite game I've discovered thanks to this channel, and I think more people should check it out. But I think more people should play Aconcagua as well. Go play all the translations. This wasn't the first one I've talked about, and it definitely won't be the last either. Hey everyone, it's Cosmo. This video is the final of the 3 upload special I wanted to make for the new year or whatever. I probably won't be doing this again because it took me a while to have all 3 videos ready, and I'd like to upload more frequently. Anyways though, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.